Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Rana Zayed, and I manage marketing for federal and partner marketing here at Flexera. Thank you for joining our first of 6 application packaging experts roundtables. Before we start, I'd like to go over some housekeeping for the webinar. Give me a second. Let me get to the next slide. This session is being recorded, and I will send the recording out within 1 to 2 business days. This roundtable webinar is meant to be interactive, so please type your questions into the Q&A chat window throughout this session. What else is there? So we have some topics we can speak to, but again, we're counting on you to drive the conversation. Again, we can go up to an hour, and we're going to have sessions for the next 6 weeks. With that, I'm going to introduce the panel we have today. Bob Kelly, we have about 75 years of combined experience here on the panel. We have Bob Kelly, who's the Director of Product Management. He's the author and founder of IT Ninja with 20 plus years in the industry. Karin Montaghi is the Technical Product Manager, and he has 8 plus years of experience. Mike O'Connor, he's a Senior Solution Engineer here at Flexera with 12 plus years of experience. James Baker, he's the Director of Sales, who has 20 plus years of experience. And Spencer Anderson, Major Account Manager with 4 years of application packaging experience. And with that, I will hand this over to Bob to start the conversation. Bob?
Thanks, Rona. Appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We wanted to keep this a little informal, so we don't have a bunch of slides. The idea really is to have a conversation about the topics that you'd like to hear about. So if you have specific questions, put them in the chat. If you just have a topic that you would like to hear us riff about, you can suggest that. We did bring a couple, so I'll kick it off with why move to MSIX. I'm actually working on an article right now about this topic because it comes up so frequently. The question is, why move to MSIX? What's interesting about it? What's important about it? Why is it happening? And then, of course, where is it? When's the adoption going to kick off? And there's a bunch of benefits that you probably heard about if you've done any kind of research at all or had a discussion at all about MSIX around the ability to completely uninstall an application because it runs in a container and you end up with not actually installing the application, but just having it run in a virtual container. So an uninstall means a complete removal. That means no Windows rot. That means no application conflicts. There's some decent benefits there. I'm kind of surprised that that's Microsoft's leading reason to IT pros. There's definitely a lot of other things, and you've probably heard the list. I think the 2 more recent things that haven't got a lot of attention are AppAttach and Windows 10X support. So AppAttach is the ability to take an MSIX package and mount it to a Windows virtual desktop without doing a traditional install. So it kind of becomes instantly available in the virtual desktop, which is really good for a non-persistent VDI session, especially because you don't have to go through that quick silent installation. It basically just becomes available, and a new version deployment could just be mounting a new version of the application. And MSIX format supports this. So I know that's gaining some traction and is pretty attractive. That feature is still in public preview right now, so it's not 100% ready for prime time like MSIX itself. And then the other big one is MSIX's support for Windows 10X. Windows 10X is the upcoming consumer edition of Windows 10. And the benefit of MSIX there is that applications can run in their own native container, isolated from other applications, whereas a traditionally installed application runs in a shared Win32 container. So the benefit, as described, is high compatibility with existing applications, and it's just a better, full trusted container, better native application experience for Windows 10X when there's an MSIX package. So there's a couple of new benefits that you might not have heard of in terms of why MSIX is interesting. Does anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, I think for me, which is going to be super valuable is clean uninstall. We know these traditional problems of WinRot and DLL hell, right? Where generally the uninstallations are not clean. It leaves some residue, and this keeps on piling up on your system, and someday you'd start seeing a blue screen on your system. Everything goes bad. I think that is one really, really great value that I see with MSIX, that it can really cleanly uninstall and leave your system in the state it was before you started investing. That is one thing that really got excited me about this MSIX.
Yeah, and they do promote that well to say, we don't want you to worry about installing an application. Right now, it's like, well, I don't want to junk up my application by installing 8 different PDF readers to see which one I like best. That's a risk. And eventually, as IT pros, every year or 2 years, we have a new gold image that we push out to get everybody refreshed and get that speed back up after the Windows rot sets in. So yeah, the idea is that shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, I know we might hear a lot of questions, but just for everybody's benefit, let me throw this question to you, Bob. Let's say I'm already using MSIs or EXEs in my organization, and I've put a lot of effort or a lot of investment in moving them to AppV, because a few years ago, AppV gave the same promises like what MSIX is doing today. So what should be my plan now? Should we stick on to AppV, or should I consider moving to MSIX, or should I wait? And is MSIX at a stage where it is ready for production, or is it still in like a beta stage where we are still not confident that it will work like the way it is promised to work like? So what do you think?
Yeah, no, that is pretty well put. I'd say it's the latter. I think Microsoft isn't telling anybody to abandon AppV. Everyone knows that AppV is going to be replaced by MSIX, but when is a little up in the air. And I think when people talk about MSIX not being ready yet, it isn't necessarily because they tried it and ran into a problem. There's always been this, AppV got hit with the same thing. Well, you can't repackage every application into AppV, and therefore, it's not the ideal solution. And it's kind of an unfair thing to say, right? You can use different technologies for different applications. The one thing that they're unlikely to do is have, device driver support inside MSIX. It just doesn't make sense. They are supporting services now. That was a recent update. So if you have an application with a service, MSIX can handle it. But that service installation actually goes outside the container. So that benefit that you spoke to of having a clean uninstall kind of goes out the window if there's a service involved, because the service can't run in the container, but they're delivering it along with the MSIX. But it's a traditional outside the container element. So it's nice to see them handling more situations, but I think it's unfair to say, because they don't handle device drivers, and I might have a couple of applications out there that have that requirement, it's not ready. I think it'd be fair to say, hey, I sat down, I packaged 20 applications and 6 of them didn't work. And so therefore I think it's not ready for me. That would be an honest approach at evaluating it. But I honestly think everybody's got so much work on their plates and so much to do. They understand MSI, they understand AppV. And so they really need to see, some strong benefits to go through the trouble of moving and changing their processes to take on a new technology. And there are a good number of benefits, but they're not all applicable to everyone. I really think that the time it takes off is going to be the time that we start seeing them from third-party vendors, because we never saw AppV marketed to ISVs to say, here's a setup file type that you can use.
Right. Totally.
One of the questions that we got in the chat is, how are we going to handle drivers in MSIX? I know you kind of were touching on that a little bit, but
Yeah, and really the answer is to handle them separately, right? So if you're doing Windows updates, your drivers should be handled along with Windows updates. These are things that don't need to and shouldn't be inside a container. And part of what Microsoft's trying to do is, re-educate people on the technologies that they choose. The application and the driver should be two separate things. And then you can manage your drivers and you manage the applications that rely on those drivers in two different ways. And that's really the right way to go about it. But we know that oftentimes the driver comes with the application. We think of them as one thing. As IT pros, if the vendors don't get on board and separate them the way Microsoft's encouraging them to, it might be on us to make that separation so that we can handle the driver and handle the application as two separate things.
Yeah. Having a driver is definitely going to be a little tricky with the whole concept of containerization, right? And I see similar challenges with Windows services as well, but Microsoft, I think, has said maybe in the next major release of MSIX, you would start seeing the support for Windows services in MSIX out of the box. So I think that will be really good.
Yeah. And even services, when a service is being used, they could be doing all kinds of stuff. And it's usually an older application that's doing it.
Right.
And it's usually not like a development best practice, the way they've decided to use a service. So, trying to cover every scenario ever implemented by every software developer is a pretty impossible task. But a lot of those uglier, older applications are now old and have been either upgraded or replaced by a competitive product. So I think overall the complexity of the applications we have to work with in these weird edge cases are slowly filtering away, making things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I see more questions coming in. Anything jump out? Yeah.
Here's another question here, Bob. MSIX, would that be similar to VMware ThinApp, but easier to create and troubleshoot? Virtual container, is that a similar container?
Yeah. So it's not really, right? So they definitely have overlapping capabilities. You have something to say about this, Kieran?
Yeah, so that's a virtual application. Yes, the containerization concept still remains the same. That is not totally different, but MSIX has got its own extra benefits over this virtual format of ThinApp.
Yeah, because I think ThinApp is more about file redirection and less about actual virtualization. So, and that benefit of running inside a virtual container also introduces challenges, right? So there's fix-ups that we have to apply with the package support framework, where if the person who wrote the application is referring to current directory for an XML file or some data, or something it's looking for, in a virtual container, it's not really in that place. So as IT pros, and with Admin Studio, we're trying to make this easier on you, but you'll have situations where the application is looking for something and can't find it, and you have to discover that and then inject this fix-up that tells the application at runtime, if you're looking here for this, it's really over here. And we're working to make that easier, but it's kind of a trade-off, right? Everything can't comfortably run in a container natively as we'd like it to. So there's going to be a number of cases where we have to make it work. More questions?
Yep. Yeah, sorry, good. Kieran.
Yeah, I was just thinking if there are no questions, I thought, well, I think one other thing about MSIX, which I really liked, is about the signing part, which is going to bring in a lot of security, but it's totally new to our IT
right?
Pro. Yeah, but the thing about MSIX is it's mandatory. Yeah. So IT pros are generally not used to signing packages before they deploy, right? So this is a brand new thing that's coming with MSIX. So that's going to be a little overhead to their existing process. But the good thing about this is it's going to bring a lot of security. It's going to make sure that the package is coming from the right source, and it's also going to make sure that the package is not tampered. The package is not opened or broken. So if something like that happens, the signature breaks and you'll not be able to install. So that is one other aspect that MSIX brings, and it adds a lot of security to your existing infrastructure, to your existing process of application deployments.
Right. And it's another benefit to the end user that comes at the expense of complexity to us as IT pros, because now you can't just tweak something. You'd have to sign it again. And a lot of us aren't used to working with certificates. So again, this is something we see as an opportunity in Admin Studio to help make it easier for you to automatically sign and keep the process of creating or editing, having signing wrapped right into it.
Another question. How will MSIX be integrated into Altiris and Workspace ONE?
I don't know. I haven't spoken directly to either. I've talked to VMware about Workspace ONE because we had some recent support, so I've been discussing the topic with those guys, and them and others. Everybody's kind of having this same conversation with me, right? Like, hey, we're looking. When do we need to support MSIX, and is it going to be successful, and when's it going to take off, and what exactly, should we be looking at doing? So I do get those questions from vendors as well. And, my prediction is end of this year, beginning of next, we start to see some of the more major vendors releasing MSIX packages as their, optional or default setup type. And then I think once we start getting MSIX packages to deploy and wrap our heads around it and start using it, I think there'll be a preference for it, and people will want to start taking better advantage of it and using it more. So that will probably be the tipping point. But in terms of an application installation, right now for most deployment tools, the installation of an application is basically a command line, right? So in the same way, an MSIX package is a PowerShell command line. So we should be able to handle the deployment of MSIX packages with any modern endpoint management system.
Yeah, while we are talking about that, we know that Intune already supports it, and we as Admin Studio are already working on it. So in the coming release of Admin Studio, you should be able to take any MSIX and should be able to send it to Intune for the end deployments. So Intune is already supporting MSIX, yeah.
Yeah, internally we've got Intune support working at Admin Studio. We'll be releasing it later, toward the end of the quarter. But unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't have all their APIs for managing Intune packages out of beta. So we're only going to be able to support MSI and MSIX with our initial release. And then I'm applying what pressure I can to Microsoft to either get them to, get those APIs for handling Win32 or, traditional legacy EXE setups in Intune out of beta, or at least tell me when it's going to happen so I can let you know when to expect it.
I'm seeing this really interesting question, so I thought I'll just put it there. And I'm sure many would be having this question in their head. So here it goes. Is the value of app packaging approaching zero? That is, with MSIX and Microsoft Business Store, the need to package/repackage apps is going away.
Yeah, I mean that's been the prediction for a long time too. Just like all applications are going to end up being cloud applications, and there won't be any desktop apps. That by many predictions that should have happened 5 years ago, and it just these things happen very, very slowly. Repackaging, you don't have to repackage that much anymore. Karen, I was just editing an article that Karen's working on, about packaging and repackaging. And I always, when I do a presentation, start by distinguishing the difference between those two. Because packaging is something you do all the time, because that could be repackaging, or it could be wrapping, or just taking advantage of a command line installation. And the main reason you repackage is, one, the vendor setup doesn't support silent installation, or you want a silent installation and some customization. And you can do that very easily with a repackage. But, if you are good at scripting and you understand how the application works, then your wrapper could inject those scripts or inject those changes that you would otherwise capture. But even trying to figure that out, like, okay, I'm gonna script the customization of this application, but in order to find out just how the application is reacting to the settings that I'm making, I'm going to repackage it. So then I can see, okay, this file is changing, this registry is changing. I'll put that in my script. So, it can be a tool to get you to a scripting end. But I think, the idea that everything comes from the store, the Microsoft Store isn't that popular with most enterprises. So, there's always the possibility that we get there someday, but it doesn't seem to be anything that's around the corner. Mike, we really haven't heard from you. You have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, right? I think the repackaging, the idea of repackaging has gone down. It's gone from the go-to, right? If it's not an MSI, let's get it into one. That's what it was, 10 plus years ago, to let's take the vendor install and work with it as best we can. And to your point, we could use, if we can just push it out as is with silent switches, let's do that. I think repackaging, to your point, it's kind of last resort now. I've got legacy EXEs from 10 plus years ago I have to continue to support, and there's no switches. There's no way to run it silently. It always throws up a dialog box I have to interact with. So, you're kind of left with, hey, I got to push this out to 1,000 users silently. I have to go through repackaging. So there's still use cases of it, but to your point, right, more and more vendor installs and the organizations we talk with prefer to leave repackaging, in those scenarios when they have to. But when it comes to, MSIX, let's say MSIX takes over everything, right? Replaces MSI, replaces executable installations. There's still, every enterprise is still going to have to do some type of customization, right? Nobody takes, or very few enterprises, I think, take the defaults all the time. There's always some type of customization or configuration you have to do. So repackaging, an MSIX that you get from the vendor, no, you wouldn't have to do that. But through modification packages and other things, you may have to, tweak and configure those packages in some way, shape, or form.
Right, and that's actually the other topic that we had kind of had in our back pocket for this session if we didn't have a good turnout with a lot of questions. But we did have a good turnout with a lot of questions. So I'll touch on it real quick, and we'll see if it generates more questions. But it was the very idea of a modification package, right? So if the big difference is that with MSI, you had a transform file, and with MSIX, you have what they call a modification package. The big difference between the two is that a transform file changes the way the application installs during the installation process, whereas the MSIX modification package is actually just a set of changes that you can apply at any time, and it can persist. So with MSI, every time, if you had a good transform file that had all the customizations you wanted, when a new version of that application came out, you would have to create a new transform file because there's that one-to-one relationship with each version of the MSI. That changes with MSIX. So if you have a modification package that has all the changes that you want, and a new version of the MSIX comes from the vendor, you can just update the application and leave the modification package there. And that modification package could potentially persist for 10, 20 versions into the future until such time that the application changes in a way that your modification no longer applies. But the idea that you don't have to redo that work every time is a time saver and something I think that's decent benefit to IT pros. And we're working on a new MSIX editor right now, and we have our eyes really set on modification packages and how to make that easy. The idea being you could just open an MSI, make the changes you want, save it as an MSIX modification package, and now you've got that customization that can persist and you can handle over time. So the format-wise, it's almost the same. There's a couple things that you can't do in a modification package that you can do in a core or primary MSI package, but for the most part, they're very, very similar.
So, Bob, what you're saying is if I create a modification package once, then I don't have to worry about creating, another modification package when there is a new version available, like I used to do for transforms. Wow, that's a great time saver, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I think it is, and and a lot of work goes into that, and you don't want to have to redo it every time. So that's the toughest thing about packaging, I think, is there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of simple things that you do 100 times that we really want to automate, or with a new technology like MSIX, maybe just get out of it entirely.
I remember a slide that Microsoft presented to the vendors about the packaging process, and it's a vortex you get sucked in. You take a package, you have to do an update, you push it out. The new update comes, you have to do customizations and push it out, and over and over and over and over and over again. And to that point, it's why don't we just be able to have it in such a way we can customize it once, and if we need to change those customizations, we can, but it's a periodic, not every single release that goes out.
Yeah, I think they call it as packaging paralysis.
Packaging paralysis,
MSIX, and how MSIX and the modification packages help you solve the problem of that packaging paralysis. That was great.
But that is a use case that they're trying to solve with MSIX, right? Is to say that we understand that vendors create setup packages and then IT pros rip them apart and customize them and deploy them in a different way. Even if that's just to get it into AppV format for the benefits of AppV. So this approach, the idea is, yes, you can use a modification package to make changes that you might need to make, but you should not have to repackage it into a different format for those benefits or for customization.
And one other advantage that modification package brings in compared to the transforms is, you can independently uninstall the modification package and leave your original package as is. So that's going to be very beneficial. Let's say I really want to add some extra modifications to my existing application. I could just uninstall the existing modification package. Your original package continues to be on the machine. Now you make or add those extra modifications and deploy it back, and you're all set. So that is one extra flexibility that modification package adds, which was not the case with transforms. You can't uninstall transform alone. You have to uninstall the entire MSI plus transform file.
Right, and that is a very good point to make, and I think it's not obvious when you see it presented, because typically when Microsoft are talking about the benefits of modification package, their audience isn't the IT pro but the developer. And so the examples that you see of modification packages are actually add-ins to applications. So here you have your application, then we apply this add-in. Look, now there's new functionality. And now look, we're going to update the add-in and remove the add-in and see how it's independent from the parent application. That's a kind of a niche use case even for developers. So, but as IT pros, we look at those modification packages as our enterprise customizations.
Hey, Bob, on that topic as well, we have an interesting question where a customer is using custom actions today based on the organizational unit, and the application is configured differently depending on where it's installed in the environment. Do we have any context around how to handle this with modification packages moving forwards?
Yeah, that's a good one. And a lot of this is going to be theoretical because I have to admit I haven't done it yet. but I think you would have a different modification package for the different scenarios, and then based on, you'd handle it like you would another deployment. So you can deploy the base application to everyone, and then if you have a collection of systems that should be one way and a collection of systems that should be another way, it would be an independent deployment, which is another nice benefit of it not being a transform. You don't have to redeploy that original application, uninstall it and reinstall it again to get your customization in. You could just apply the modification package. And then, this idea of custom actions is interesting too, because a lot of people would agree that custom actions are terrible because they allowed people to do whatever they want in an MSI. So in some cases, you have an MSI package that's actually doing a custom install from a command line of a setup that's in the MSI. And it's not really an MSI at all. You can't really go into the file table and make changes. It's frustrating from a customization standpoint when you expect an MSI and find out that they cheated you, and it's really another setup hidden in an MSI. And then it also can potentially allow you to do anything outside of what the installation was designed to provide. So there was a conscious decision not to provide that capability in MSIX. And then they started getting feedback that, hey, wouldn't it be nice to do pre and post installation scripts so you can run a PowerShell before the installation or after the installation? I said, hey, wait a minute, isn't that custom actions? Because then you can just have a PowerShell script that does whatever you want, and have an MSIX package that doesn't really do anything. And the response to that was, they're not going to allow ISVs to do it, just IT pros. So how exactly they would enforce or limit that capability wasn't worked out, but that was the thinking behind how they'd prevent it from being abused.
Here's a question that we seem to be getting a lot in the chat. It would be, how does MSIX packages compare to AppStacks?
Mike or Karen?
I haven't. Well,
Yeah,
we
so
know that
AppStacks are AppStacks is VMware. The kind of approach. I think it's similar in some respects to MSIX. Obviously, it's proprietary to VMware and to be used in kind of their infrastructure. So the biggest one would be, you'd have to be a VMware customer, right? Versus MSIX is going to be built into Windows. So whether you're a consumer or an enterprise at a certain build level of Windows 10, you have the ability to take in and utilize applications and quote installed through MSIX, where AppStacks is limited to the enterprise because it's VMware. And looking online, and I may be incorrect because I'm not an expert at AppStacks, but it looks like it's requires additional VMware infrastructure for it to work. So it makes sense for those that are invested in VMware infrastructure that they want to take advantage of it. I think it's a similar concept, but MSIX is obviously going to have wider adoption because it's meant not just for the enterprise, like AppV was, right? AppV was really geared towards the enterprise, where MSIX is enterprise and the consumer base. And it's, in essence, the quote client is built into, Windows 10. So,
is it VMware's answer to app layering? We hear this app layering from Citrix and all. So, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that does bring up another point, Mike, because you're saying it comes with Windows, and that is actually another big milestone, on paving the way to broader MSIX adoption, is the availability to run MSIX across all versions of Windows. And only recently did the version of Windows, the older version of Windows 10 that did not support MSIX, fell out of support. So now all versions of Windows 10 have native MSIX support, and they've introduced something called MSIX Core, which is basically a hack for Windows 7 and older versions of Windows before 10 that is an MSI package that you install in the system that allows it to understand an MSIX package and do something with it. Now, it's not giving you the containerization capabilities. It's not giving you any of the benefits of MSIX, really. It's looking at that MSIX package and kind of handling it more like an MSI package, where they'll take the files, put the files where they're supposed to go, look at the registry entries, inject the registry entries as though they were installed. So it's not the benefit of MSIX, but it does address what would be a big ISV concern of, I don't want to introduce my application to people in a setup format that everybody might not be able to take advantage of. So now all Windows 10 versions have native support. And if you're an enterprise that's still running earlier versions of Windows 10, you have MSIX Core that you can deploy, which gets you to the point that these MSIX packages are applicable to all the Windows systems you support. I see over 50 questions. There must be another good one in there.
Spencer, are you reading them out, buddy?
Going through them as quickly as I can here. The
Okay, I've got a question. Super easy. Like we have Admin Studio and Install Shield, is there any tool for MSIX?
Like we have Admin Studio and Install Shield, is there such a tool for MSIX?
I'd still say Admin
Studio and Install Shield, they're the same tools.
Well, I think here they can look out for our
we have full support for. No, go ahead. I think you were setting up your own question you wanted to answer.
No, I was saying maybe there's a good point where they could hear about our new MSIX editor. Maybe you want to talk about it. Yeah.
So we are creating a new editor just for MSIX. If you have Admin Studio, you know that we did that for AppV as well. And it's because it's such a different file format, it has such different requirements, then to try to force a Windows MSI experience or Windows installer experience into these other technologies just doesn't make sense. So a long time ago, we had just the Install Shield exe, the install script format. Then MSI came along and kind of supplanted that, and then MSI was the big one. AppV, we had an AppV editor so that it's not a black box. Without the right tools, you create an AppV package and it doesn't work. Oh well, I don't know what to do about that. With our editor, you can go in and see everything that's in there, manipulate it, and so we're doing the same for MSIX, where we're generating a new, more modern look and feel, tailored specifically to MSIX, so you can see the manifest view and see the XML, and then also see the, which would be the equivalent of the table view for MSI, and then of course the GUI, registry and file and other attributes of the package graphically, so you don't have to understand the manifest file at all. But the new tool is something we're doing a private beta for. There's a sign-up form at the Flexera community website. So if you're interested, please do come and sign up. We've got a number of people who've signed up already. We're looking to probably close that off soon because the tool's making some progress, and we're ready to start getting feedback from our customers, and not just customers. There's, I'd say, about a third of the people who have requested to participate aren't customers of Admin Studio. And we're still very happy to take the feedback and get the benefit of the perspective of people that aren't Admin Studio customers. So it's not a requirement.
Absolutely. And in terms of the capabilities, there was a question from earlier around signing, and the question was, it sounds like it can be difficult. So how do we make that easier with the Admin Studio solution?
We make it easier by just allowing you to say, here's my certificate, and then you just click a button and it's signed. There's, the idea is to keep it simple so that, because every time you edit it or make a change or you're done and you want to deploy it, it has to be re-signed. So the idea is to allow you to go into preferences and get things set up, and then we can basically handle it from there very quickly and easily.
Here's another
and at the same time,
Bob.
we are also... Go ahead, Spencer.
Well, I was going to say, here's another question. How do you troubleshoot MSIX package applications? Sometimes the shortcut doesn't launch at all, and there's not much troubleshooting we can do.
Yeah, I think that's a limiting factor right now, that there isn't very good logging for what's happening. You kind of need a tool to analyze. Karen?
Yeah, and having said that, there is a out of the box fix up they have for testing the MSIX and its behavior. They call it as tracing the app. So what you could do is it basically analyzes your runtime behavior of MSIX. So you could inject a trace inside your existing MSIX and then start working on that MSIX like you do, launch shortcuts and all. And if there are any issues that are encountered, the trace would look for those issues, and it would generate a set of logs and lets you know, hey, these are the problems with your MSIX. Now, the advantage is you could look at those trace logs and then figure out if there are any additional fix-ups that would be needed to fix any of those issues or errors that are reported by trace. So that is out of the box with the package support framework. So that's really cool. And what we have been trying to do, and we understand this problem, so we are trying to see how we can make tracing of MSIX really easy in Admin Studio with our new editor. I think it should be a click of button. You open up MSIX, you say trace this app, and that app should be traced, and it should list you the errors and say, hey, these are the problems with your package. So that is how you could, debug your MSIX today. There is no really a straightforward method, but that's what we got.
It's not as simple as a verbose logging command line switch. You actually have to inject a fix-up into the package in order to generate these trace logs. And as Karen said, this is something that we're looking to make as easy as possible in the new MSIX editor we're working on. So if you have the package and you execute it with trace, you can do that with a simple toolbar button. And then we're going to take the next step. And if we see that the error is something that can be fixed by one of the published fix-ups, like the file redirection fix-up I mentioned earlier, we'll look at the logs, identify that, and suggest or apply the fix for you automatically. So, where we can, we'll make it as easy as possible. But if you create an MSIX package and you run the shortcut and nothing happens, then it could be that file redirection fix-up issue. But as Karen says, the only real way to get analysis of that would be to inject the trace up or the trace fix-up, which you can get from GitHub and read about on Microsoft's website.
But do you see, I guess, a lot of work for people who are doing application packaging? I know there was a little bit of a learning curve, I'd say, to go from EXEs to MSIs. Do you see the same learning curve or the same a lot of work for people who are currently doing this to try to get to MSIX?
I don't think so.
Move their apps to that format.
It's pretty straightforward. Like is coming up in this conversation, almost like app V, when it works, it's easy as can be. You do your capture, you got a package, you run it, it works. Perfect. When it doesn't work, things get complicated. And generating logs, analyzing logs, trying to, correct and inject the right fixes to make it work, that is going to be a new skill set that I think people will have to develop. And tools like Admin Studio can can obviously do whatever possible to make it easier, but it's a different, a different skill set. I think that background of understanding Windows applications and how they work, where to look for customizations, where things are likely to go wrong, that kind of background you have from packaging and doing something like AppV will definitely carry forward from a troubleshooting standpoint. But, I think the good news is if I were to compare the complexity of MSI and MSIX, I would say MSIX is considerably easier because you don't have a table, database table to work with and a million, built-in properties and vendor zone custom properties. That there was a lot to kind of figure out, and there's an extensive documentation and SDKs available. Whereas MSIX is really, here's the files, here's the registry changes. There are things like capabilities and dependencies and other attributes that you might not be used to. That are more,
declarations.
Yeah, extensions, more UWP type stuff that you might not have had to deal with as a IT pro that didn't bother with the App Store. But they're not terribly complicated.
Yeah, I don't imagine a case where you'd add, let's say, an extra extension or / declaration. Both of these words mean the same. So declarations or extensions within your existing MSIX. As a part of repackaging, given exe to MSIX, we administratively already make sure that if there are any extensions available, those will be captured and will be part of your MSIX anyway. So I don't see a scenario where you would want to add one extra extension to your existing app. I think that goes even for capabilities. So that way, I think, like you said, I don't see a really big learning curve for somebody to move from exe to MSIX or repackage exes to MSIX.
Yeah, and for new people, I think it'll be easier to pick up because there isn't all that how it works stuff that you really have to understand like you did with Windows installing.
Yeah.
Another question we're getting are we seeing a more generated interest in MSIX? And I can kind of talk through that a little bit, as I know I have conversations weekly with customers who have been inquiring about MSIX. I have yet to see a lot of people start to move to that, partially because I don't think they're seeing enough MSIX packages from vendors as yet, but I know that there's been a push more, and I think, Bob, we've been talking about that. There's been a push more for more software suppliers to actually move to MSIX to push them either through the Microsoft App Store. But I don't know, what have you been seeing there, Bob, out in, with talking to customers and other people?
Yeah, there's a ton of interest for sure. I mean, it's as you can see, I mean, we came here saying, let's talk about what you want. All we've talked about is MSIX. And we've got a pretty good sized audience that showed up for this. And like we mentioned, we'll be doing this for the next few weeks. So, we continue this conversation or pick up another related topic. But the actual adoption, it has started. There's a couple of applications out there like OneDrive, iTunes. In the Microsoft Store, there may be MSIX packages that you don't really see as MSIX packages because you don't download an MSIX file. It's just there on that technology. Tim Mangan has done some good investigation and writing on the topic of MSIX that I recommend checking out, where he's done some analysis of the Windows Store, because Microsoft will claim that there's a ton of MSIX packages in there, but then if you look at them, they're really UWP packages, which are similar in several ways, but not MSIX. So there's some fuzziness around exactly where we are right now. But as an IT pro, I'll consider MSIX is a real thing when I go to Google or Adobe's website to download the latest setup, and there's a .msix option for me to choose. That's where I feel like it's a real thing, because then I'm actually managing that file and deploying an MSIX package, not just directing things from the store where it's kind of hidden.
I think the challenge of Win32 adds to this as well, right? So today there are a lot of Win32 components within your legacy MSI or EXE, which may not make it ready for the store. So you might still want to move that or repackage it to MSIX and still sideload it and not actually consider moving it to the store. So that is another challenge that I see. How do you, because today UWP doesn't support all of the Win32 features or those APIs. UWP is still not at a stage where it supports all the Win32 APIs. So till the time it goes there, I don't see that you could take any of your existing Win32 app, make it in a form where it is ready to be put on the store. So you might still have an option to just sideload and not upload it to Microsoft Store.
Right.
Yeah,
And
I think some of it's going to require
kind of a special. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, it just comes down to, right, this is a different concept. We're not installing application files into the same layer, that the operating system is. And applications that expect that and expect to be able to install wherever they want and call whatever they want, for security and for a host of other reasons, they're kind of dialing that back. I think of it's like on your mobile phone, your Android or your Apple device. It's the application is there. It runs in a container. It asks for certain permissions and resources. But if you want to get rid of it, you just delete the app and it's gone. Right? It doesn't leave. Ideally it doesn't leave anything behind. So that's what I think Microsoft is trying to go with this, is trying to bring that same concept to Windows, where if you want to delete the MSIX container, then every remnants of that that application is gone. So it makes it much easier from an administration side of view to completely get rid of something if you really want to.
Yeah, and updating it. I mean, some of the other cool benefits were, you're not actually updating the file that's in use. So if the application's running, you're actually laying down another file next to it in a single instance store, so that the next time the application runs, it will get the update. You don't have to kill the application like we do today. Is another benefit. But Kieran mentioned side loading, and it made me think it's worth pointing out that initially you'd have to go into Windows and turn on the ability to apply MSIX packages, because they were considered side loaded. They're not coming from the store. You're going to do it from PowerShell. You've got to set this setting, and that's no longer the case. So that policy, I think, still exists for backward compatibility purposes, but it's no longer necessary. An MSIX package can just install without having to alter the configuration of your Windows.
I was in fact reading somewhere that Microsoft might just get away with this whole setting of side loading from the operating system altogether. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I've read it somewhere. Yeah.
Here's a couple other questions going your way. First off, what version of Admin Studio should I be on to take advantage of MSIX and converting? And then the second part of the question is, will Admin Studio be able to bulk convert MSIs to MSIX packages?
Yes, we can bulk convert for sure. What version to be on? My answer is always the latest, because that's where we've done the best stuff, right? Because every version's building upon the last. In terms of what version you need to be on to do what with MSIX, I guess would be the question, because we've taken an iterative approach to supporting MSIX. We didn't derail our whole roadmap and all the other cool things we've been doing with package feed module and automation. Instead, we've been slowly adding MSIX capabilities to Admin Studio for the last year and a half. So any point along the last year and a half of releases, you have MSIX support, but you have more MSIX support as it goes up. And I think I have a detailed blog post in the Flexera community where I break down what we did over each release and what we have planned coming up.
And
I would like to start from 2019. Sorry. I was saying maybe I would like to start from 2019, Admin Studio 2019, because it has the conversion capability.
Yeah, that would be a good one. I mean, the very first thing we did was just add the ability to look at your packages and recommend if it was a good candidate for conversion to MSIX or not, based on a few rules that we'd created. So, that was the first small thing we did, and then as I said, we've been building on it since then. James?
Yeah, there's been some requests about how people can join the beta program for our new editing capability as well. So I'm sure we can get the link out to everyone actually on this session as well, if people would like to adopt and be involved as part of that.
Yeah, we can include that link when we send out the recording for sure. But if you just go to community.flexera.com and go to the Admin Studio product area, there's a blog post that describes it and links to a request form to participate.
Hey, I've got this question. I think it's really interesting. How does MSIX apps work with user configurations? If need to uninstall or reinstall, does user's configuration get removed or need to redo, or can it be retained? I think the beauty of MSIX is it is not per machine installation, but per user installation. And what it does is it always tries to maintain user configurations in its own local app data, and that is within the container. So when you actually uninstall an MSIX, it all takes out even the user configuration, so you're all good. It's a really clean uninstall. So it has got its own containerized app local data, or local app data, where it would keep its user configurations, and it has got it doesn't merge that with your actual machine's local app data, so that way it is still containerized, and the concept of user configuration is still met. And the advantage is when you uninstall MSIX, even the user configurations will be removed because technically it is inside the container.
Right. If you're removing the application, then you would want to remove the user customization. If you're upgrading the application, if you're installing a new version over an old one, it will obviously retain those settings.
Right.
And the relationship between versions isn't a GUID anymore. It's much more, name oriented. So it's not it's not as complicated to manage updates as it was with Windows Installer. And I think we have used up our time for this week, but I hope everyone found it enjoyable. We will go through the questions we didn't get to answer and maybe answer some of those in the community so we can get some discussion going there. We could also, take suggestions for what we might talk about next time, or questions you didn't ask that you'd like to ask there or have addressed in future sessions. Same time next week. We'll be here and hope to talk to you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.